evening, everybody. My name is Prerna, and I represent the enterprise team at Cognitia. On behalf of the whole team, I welcome everybody who is present for the session today. I hope all of you are doing well and safe at your own houses. Today, we are going to learn about microservices and containers, as you already know about the session. Before going on and starting with the content for it, I will quickly take some time to introduce Cognitia to you. So Cognitia is one of the leading digital talent transformation companies, and we have been into this business for more than 5 years now. We have been delivering to 450 customers, more than 450 customers actually, over the globe, and have been successful in training more than 1.3 lakh professionals worldwide. Our deliveries also happen in 45 countries, and we work with over 7,000 industry veterans. These work as instructors or SMEs or consultants with us and are helping us out deliver various projects of different kinds at our customer locations. We are also authorized for trainings with bodies like Red Hat, Automation Anywhere, ITIL, ISC Square, and also we are a Silver Microsoft partner. Some of the rewards and recognitions are flashing on your screens. This is all because of the kind of deliveries that we do and the quality that we hold in them. Moving on, there are certain centers of excellence that we have. You can go to the next slide, Shiva. Center of excellence I was just mentioning about. So we essentially deal into the emerging technology space, machine learning and artificial intelligence, microservices, Internet of Things, cloud technologies, DevOps, RPA, big data analytics, and many more, as you would always know about, are very hot cakes in market. That's exactly the area that we have specialization upon. These are just the overview of the topics. I'm sure you would know how vast these are in themselves. So we cater to all those units and modules of it with various topics and subtopics, with extensive hands-on practicals and case studies from across the globe. Um, uh, so today's session is about Dockers and Kubernetes, and a little on container side and microservices. Along with the webinars that most of you have been attending, we have also come up with certain concept, a very specific and special concept of masterclasses that we run for one day, and these are extensive on hands-on. 80 to 90% of the content of our masterclasses is all about doing practicals by your own along with the trainer through virtual platform. These are live sessions that we conduct. Some of them have already happened, and we are rolling out lot many interesting sessions further. We have an upcoming session on Docker and Kubernetes with Shiva himself that will be conducted tomorrow. In case some of you have missed out on enrolling for it or need more details, you can definitely write back to us and we'll be more than happy to help you. One more session that we have tomorrow, the masterclass I'm talking about, is on machine learning in production. That is also going to be conducted by one of the industry veterans. So in case you have any preferences or you yourself are wanting to explore a little in the ML area, we'll be glad to have you on board and get going with the session with you guys. We're coming up with more different deliveries on this. We are planning certain sessions on Azure IoT, React.js, and Amazon Web Services, as we call it, AWS Cloud Computing as well. As and when these are planned and chalked out, we'll have a formal communication spread across, and I'm sure you will be listening about it through your L&D unit as well, or maybe from our social media platform if we are connected. So yes, please drop in a query if you are wanting to know more about our masterclasses or any of the trainings in detail. We'll be happy to assist you there. I will now hand over the platform to Shiva to get going with the session today.
Thank you, Prerna. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining from. Today, we're going to talk about microservices and containers. Primarily, we'll target Kubernetes so that it is easier to kind of, give you a fair idea of what's happened. So we have been working in microservices from at least last 6 years till this point, and we have been kind of seeing the overall development in this particular area. So what we are going to discuss about is what are microservices? Why are they so popular? Why are they so powerful at this particular point of time? Why do companies want microservices? And how platforms like Kubernetes are making life easier for companies to do these microservices and deliver these microservices at scale. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of today's discussion. So let's get started. So microservices is not really a new concept. It's actually architectural style. You might have heard of a lot of different architectural styles from the start of the computer era, starting from like a single tier system and a monolithic application, as we call it, to a multi-tier system or entire application to microservices. Of late, you must be hearing about some of the other fancy terms like serverless and so on. But all of them conceptually fit under a overall architectural style called service-oriented architecture. Okay. End of the day, service-oriented architecture is a concept. Many people might have heard of it during your various stages of your career. Some might have also heard of service-oriented architecture is dead and so on, but it's a concept, so literally it cannot be killed. So let's actually get started. It's a very old thing, as I said. It's not really a new thing. It has been there from 1980s at least, where people have been talking in terms of services, all the way from technologies like Corba, where the technologies were very immature, if I have to call it like that, right? And we kind of came a great deal from the place where we started with respect to this technology cycle. As I said, service-oriented architecture just defines the concept in terms of services. So what it says is, if you are able to design your application as a set of services, then what you will get is a set of composable services. That means you will be able to mix and match these services to achieve your business goals or business results in a much better fashion. Okay, there are also various other principles. Today we'll actually talk about the standard principles in terms of microservices, which in turn means they're also service-oriented architecture principles. Traditionally, we have been designing applications in a very different way, and we will talk about why is that. Okay, so traditionally, whenever we used to design an application, the first question which we used to ask, especially in enterprises, was how many people are going to use this application concurrently? That was the question which we used to ask. Well, let's say 100, 200, 300, 500, whatsoever. Depending on that, we used to actually do something known as hardware sizing exercise, where we used to kind of define that, okay, for supporting this volume, this is what I need, or this is the kind of compute power of what I need, this much RAM, this much memory, so on and so forth. If the users cross beyond these many, then probably we need to scale it. And the way we scale it is usually via clustering. That is a traditional model. That's how we used to think. Now, that's good, right? There's nothing wrong with the way we kind of have seen things. But let's take a look at the current scenario. At this given point of time, do we know how many people are using Facebook? Or do we know how many people are using Google? Or how many people are using LinkedIn? Or Netflix? Or Prime Video? Or WhatsApp for that matter? All of these are supporting a large volume of customers reliably. And how do you achieve something like that? That's exactly what most of the companies, especially the companies which are targeting internet scale businesses, right, are trying to do and are trying to achieve. And achieving that is not simple. That actually had to kind of push us to an edge where, companies like Netflix and Amazon have showed us ways of leveraging microservices as a platform or as a concept to ensure that we're able to get to the point what you're actually desiring. Okay, so as I said, microservices, you can just treat them as a modern version of service-oriented architecture. In the modern world, these are the three important things. There's also a fourth one, but these are the three important things. The speed of delivery, because there's a lot of competition in the outside world, and it is if you miss it, someone else will pick it. That's exactly how the world is at this particular point. So the speed of delivery, or the time to market as we call it, is very critical. And unless the time to market is able to be met at a good pace, your business will always lag. And if you are not able to adapt quick enough, right, then you may have to see the unforeseen consequences, and that's not easy to deal with. For example, let's take the current situation of COVID-19, right? Many businesses were not ready for the digital disruption which just occurred because of COVID-19. Unless we adapt, there are chances that we are taking a very major hit with respect to our businesses, right? So something like that. So your adaptability for a given situation matters, and the speed of delivery is one of the critical asks. And whenever there is an disruption or whenever there was an unexpected event, scalability matters. As I said, we have to scale to unknown number of users so that it becomes important. Innovation and experimentation should be part of your DNA. Like what I mean is, it should be part of your organization's DNA, as we call it, right? So holding, different positions, what I have realized is the organization DNA is all about, people and culture and technology of these particular, folks, how they really think and how they really adapt to the modern nature and modern needs of the applications themselves. The last but not the least concept is about cloud and DevOps. Cloud and DevOps were once upon a time, DevOps is not very old. DevOps is hardly 10 years old at this point, 10, 11 years old at this point. So it's fairly new, Cloud definitely, around 2000, 2002 sorts, it actually came into the whole industry. It has disrupted, as you know, the number one cloud provider is Amazon Web Services, who is also the richest person on earth at this particular point, right? So the way how a e-commerce business transformed themselves to being a digital leaders, right? That itself is another bigger win, what you can see from technology aspects, right? So in simple terms, in the modern world, cloud, DevOps, these are some of the important things. Speed of delivery is important. Innovation and experimentation should be part of your organization's culture. These are the ones which will help you win. How do you achieve that, right? That is what we will actually see. So let's talk a little bit about monolith versus microservices. This is a fair, business presentation for the most part. So let's actually quickly go through it. So technically, traditionally we have been doing applications, or we have been building applications which are across multiple tiers, right? We kind of call it presentation tier, business tier, or database tier, and there will be another tiers, couple of other layers which you can actually add. One good thing we used to do is we used to at least split the application into a set of modules, and then we used to put them together. But all of them used to share the same common database and the different layers for that matter. And that is exactly what adds the complexity. When you talk in terms of microservices, think in terms of business capabilities. That would be easier for you to think through. Here is a small example of it. This is not a very fancy example, but a very simple example of how you can use how you can actually split your conceptual business model into, set of microservices. So if you see, let's assume there was a monolithic application which was managing customers, orders, product, and accounting. Let's assume these are the four capabilities which were built in that particular application. And when you are actually thinking in terms of microservices, probably you're thinking in terms of, each of them as independent pieces. And we will talk about on what basis should I be splitting my capability, because my order contains products. Why shouldn't I have both order and product together? What really defines this rule? So these are some of the questions whenever you're actually decomposing an existing monolithic application. And why do we need to decompose? Because our application has grown so big that we are not able to scale rapidly or scale selectively. These may be some of the challenges. We'll talk about the challenges with monoliths. We'll also talk about challenges with microservices in general, and then we'll actually see how all these things come into the container world and how we can actually leverage them at this particular point of time. Okay, so what you're seeing here is four business capabilities being split into four separate microservices, and think of as if each of the microservices will either talk to each other via APIs or some sort of a predefined protocol. It could be even a pub sub, publish subscribe, something like MQ or a Kafka. It could be any of the standard protocols. But what I'm to simplify the discussion, I've just put it as API. Think of that each microservices will talk to each other as via a standard API. And if you notice something interesting, each microservice here seems to have its own database layer, okay? Because you're seeing two databases, right? Don't get confused with this particular thing. What it is trying to actually tell you is, you have different data stores. And when I say different data stores, it could be the same database, it could be multiple databases, it could be, multiple data stores. One may be using MySQL, another one may be using MongoDB. It all depends, so it depends on the type of business and type of microservice you're dealing with. We'll talk more about this at a little later point, but just think of as if each of the microservice is a self-contained unit. It has its own layers. It is completely independent of the other microservice. In case if it has to talk to the other microservice, service, it will communicate over API. That should kind of set a good understanding of what is a bare minimum definition of microservice, which we can. All right. So we'll come back to that. What are the main principles of microservices? So these are the following ones. We are going to discuss them in detail. So modularity, autonomous, hide implementation details, automation, stateless, and highly observable. So think of these six parts are part of the principles which you kind of see as part of microservices. So let's actually go deeper. So as you can see, first is modularity. So you see this, we kind of cannot decide whether something is too big or something is too small. So let's actually talk about it, right? So let's take an example of the order service. We know that when we place an order, an order service would have a set of products in it. That's exactly what an order consists of, right? I bought three products and that's what my order would consist of. And when I buy these three products, right, just because I bought these three products, it really doesn't mean I am going to ship these three products immediately, right? So combining order service and shipping service doesn't make sense, because order management or the order taking could be something which may be happening today, whereas order shipping may happen something sometime later. Just because there's a relationship, that doesn't mean that they are supposed to be together. That's the whole way to kind of simply understand or look at this particular thing. And the other way of looking at it is, just because you're not able to combine, or I said do not combine multiple things, it doesn't even mean you want to split the order management service into such a granular service, something like create order as a microservice, update order as a microservice. Even that doesn't help, because you are actually making it too small. It will become very difficult for you to manage these microservices when you have a lot of capabilities. So on what basis should I really decide the right granularity or right modularity of my microservice? It is based on two simple things, right? One is, it should be modeled based on your business responsibilities. Okay, it should be based on your single responsibility principle. That means if it is an order management service, it should manage orders. That's the whole ask. Okay, that's nothing else which you really need to worry about. Okay, so that's the whole ask whenever you're talking about single responsibility principle. Similarly, each of these microservices should have their own set of concerns, or separation of concerns as we call it, and then they should be understandable by a person. We'll talk more about it in the next slides, but think of these as the primary points on basis of which you really want to split your microservices. To simplify this definition, I'll just say single responsibility principle is your best friend. Each service has its own responsibility. That will be easier for you to kind of justify to your business and also to your technology teams. And let's talk a little bit more whenever we talk in terms of teams. Traditionally, we have seen teams like this, where you have a front-end team, you have a middleware team, you have a back-end team, okay, or database team, right? And each of these teams, kind of share certain functionality across. For example, the front end of accounts is here, customers is here, orders is here. Similarly, the middleware tiers are also at the separate layers, and the database teams are also at the separate layers. Whenever there is an issue, right, usually it comes to the UI team, because that's exactly what is the front, receiving end of the customers, right? The customers generally see the user interface, and then for example, let's assume the customer ran a report, and the report took like 5 minutes for whatever reason, right? The first person who will get a call is probably your support team or the UI team, saying, hey, why is this report taking such a long time, right? And then it actually, the bug passes on, saying, okay, probably this is because of the UI loading late, or maybe the data is being pulled at a later point, or maybe the database which is executing the report is running slower, or whatsoever. So there could be different reasons which could have caused it, or it could be a combined effect of all these things. So it is not easy for us to pinpoint what went wrong where, right? So that's something which is changing when you think in terms of microservices. If you think in terms of microservices, you actually look at it like this, right? Each of these business capabilities are, instead of having it like this in vertical order, you have it in horizontal. So you took the business capability, the people who do the UI, the people who build the server side, the database administrators, or the DB people of that particular microservice are together. So you're actually talking about team modularity, right? Now, what is the advantage of this? The advantage is, if the order microservice is not performing well, I know whom to talk to. I know who are accountable for this particular microservice. I really don't need to figure out which team possibly did this, but I exactly know which team is responsible for it, and I will go talk to them. And it is easier for the businesses to manage, and it is also easier for the technology folks to manage their own microservice because they absolutely have zero dependency on almost all the other microservices. They are independent in their own ways. If there is a problem, they would be able to confidently handle it within their technical scope. So what microservices is preaching is think in terms of product and not in terms of project. That's exactly what microservices is teaching us while we discuss about. So let's move on. So each microservices really do not or should not be sharing that data or should not be sharing the same set of database. That's exactly what it kind of preaches. It says that you should not be going against the same database for whatever reason. The reason is very simple, because if you are really doing it at a data level, you will not be able to segregate the functionalities. Maybe I will come and modify orders data, or I will go modify someone else's data, which is not even my accountability or not their accountability, right? So something like this is also a very important aspect to consider. So think of no two microservices will be sharing the same database or same data in simple terms, right? If your order tables, probably my order tables are owned by my order service, my product tables are owned by my product service. You can think of it like that, or you can think of as if they have their own separate databases or separate schemas. You can think in either of the three formats. Depends on the maturity of the organization and how they are able to strat the data. So that's going to be an important ask. But end of the day, just think as if no one else is going to write to your database. You own your database. Think of it like that. It's easier to kind of understand. All right. So traditionally, we used to think in terms of WAR files, AR files. This is in terms of Java. Again, if you're thinking in terms of .NET or any of the other ones, also we used to have it traditionally. We used to have a big web server or application server, and we used to dump our deliverables into that particular server. And that server was responsible for managing multiple such applications. And what happens if the server goes down? When that server goes down, it also takes down the entire fleet of applications, whatever was managed with that particular server. So it was actually a single point of failure for most of the applications, in fact, right? So what is happening after that is nowadays we are actually talking about self-contained applications, or fat jars as we call it, or Dockers, as you might have heard of late, right? Docker containers have become very common. Docker containers are the ones which have become, or not necessarily Docker, containerization or containers have become a core part of most of the businesses. And today we are actually going to see a couple of demos of them. Okay, we are actually going to see a hands-on demo of Kubernetes as well as Dockers for that matter, where you will be able to understand the need of such technologies and how they are really impacting. So we will see the demo of both. I will show you auto scaling. I will show you discovery. I will also show you load balancing. These are three separate aspects which I need to kind of showcase as part of this demo. So I will see that at the later point of the session. All right. So as you can see, either you are talking about self-contained Java files. If any of you are from Java background, you might have heard of Spring Boot, is one of such technologies which can give you a fat job, which is self-contained. If you're from .NET, you might have heard of .NET Core. If you're from Python, there are a couple of different options there, like Flask for that matter. And irrespective of them, all of them kind of boil down to Docker at this particular point. So they all enable you to containerize your application and deploy it as needed. All right. So each microservice talks to other microservices with APIs. This is something which we already said. The versioning of these APIs really matters, and versioning of APIs is a very important concept because you may be compatible with certain versions of that particular API, and you may not be compatible with certain other versions. For example, if you can see that your order service is actually talking to a version 1 of this particular customer service, while the version 2 is already out there for some other applications to consume, right? So each of the versions of the microservices, they can actually be independent. There's no dependency between these versions. That's something which you would observe, okay? So that's a very common thing, and that's the autonomous part. Let's take a look at the other principle, which says hide implementation details. Take a look at this particular microservice. We have two microservices which are just exposing the functionality as an REST API, like a HTTP REST API or a JSON REST API or whatever you want to really call it, right? So you have two REST APIs, and does it really matter on which technology where they developed? It really doesn't matter. Why? Because to the external world, this is what it looks like. All I really care about is what API and what is the input, what is the output. For the API, what is an API? API stands for Application Programmable Interface. And trust me, it is not a new thing. Many people think think that API means something which listens on HTTP and listens on JSON. No, or talks in terms of JSON. That's not the real definition of API. An API just means a fixed input and fixed output contracts. You just know that for these inputs, this is the output, this is a resource or whatsoever. That's the basic definition, and there is no specific technology associated for a particular API. If two programs talk in terms of Java, probably that's a Java API. Right? It is like that. So if you really want to kind of go down to the details of API, you would fairly understand that API is nothing to do with JSON or HTTP in particular, but it has become a common, notation that most of us, when we talk about API, we always talk about RESTful APIs. That has been a common thing. All right. So what is the microservices also encourage, automation as a practice, and if you notice, this is something which is very common of late, where we have CI/CD pipelines and DevOps, practices within the organization, where people are able to build, test, deploy, or deploy them in production and just manage this particular overall ecosystem. One of the important aspects of microservices is testing. Testing is a most important aspect of microservices, and we expect it to happen automatically. That would be the expectation. So let's just move on. The only difference between a continuous integration and continuous deployment is that in terms of continuous integration, we stop at the testing stage, and we may not be confident enough to directly move to the production. LinkedIn claims that day in, day out, or every day they make around 30,000 deployments. That's a huge number. That means almost 1,000 deployments every hour, right? That doesn't mean LinkedIn is actually going down and coming back up every second, right? It is an incremental way of kind of publishing your application to ensure that the people are able to see, or people are able to see the changes as and when they publish. That's exactly what we are actually trying to do. This actually builds confidence in our own application. So microservices actually build confidence into our own applications which we are actually delivering. Each microservice is supposed to be stateless. This is a very good principle. We might have heard of this, we might have read about this, and even in REST APIs, right? So the whole principle talks about how the microservices, or each of the microservices, should be independent of each other, should be stateless about each other. They need not know who is the client, or they will know who is the client based on what information the client is passing. Right, instead of you managing the data in any sort of a session or any sort of a stored context, you just manage it with respect to what information was passed to you. Okay, what does it really help you do? Today I may know who you are, and today as soon as there was a lot of load on my server and I scaled up like 100 services, the 100th service definitely doesn't even know who you are. Right, so your behavior should not depend on which service handled your request. That's the exact definition of being stateless. It really doesn't matter who's handling your request, but your definition, or your way, or the response which you're going to get should be independent of whoever handled the request. That's the primary principle of statelessness. Okay, and if you deep dive into this, you will actually get even more concrete, secure ways of doing this. Like you might have heard of JWT tokens, JSON Web Tokens. They are also enabling us to do stateless authentication and a lot more. They can actually do a lot of the important aspects in the modern era. All right. One of the important principles of microservices is that they are supposed to be highly observable. What it means is I need to know how my microservices are performing. I need to be able to look into the details and say, okay, this guy is overloaded. Probably I need to scale a few more. Or I may have to say, okay, this guy doesn't really have enough load. Maybe there are 10 copies running, and I should say, let's reduce it to 3 and see how does it behave, right? So if you really know how exactly your microservices are working, you would be able to figure out how else, or how many of these components would be required for you to deliver, or for you to efficiently manage your own microservices. Okay, and if you observe something here, all of the logs are actually outwards. You see that there are a lot of microservices, and each of them have the log outwards. What it really is showcasing is that you're actually logging out of your logs are actually streamed out of your microservices. Think of it like that. It is easier to understand. And these logs, because you have so many distributed systems, it's not easy to kind of go and check each and every log. So what we generally do is we put together some sort of a centralized logging system, and that really matters. And this is one of the important aspects whenever you talk about microservices. People should be able to have an unified view of what happened in your system, and based on that unified view, in this case I'm showing a ELK stack. There is EFK stack, there are Splunk, there are a lot of commercial options which are available out there. which would be helpful in achieving some of these things. All right. Monitoring is also another important aspect. There are a lot of beautiful tools out there like AppDynamics, Dynatrace, Prometheus, and so on. There are a lot of open source and closed source tools which are helping you to manage your own microservice enterprises. Whenever data traverses from one microservice to another microservice, maybe you may want to kind of trace which all microservices have been the data has actually passed through what microservices. In order to do that, you actually inject something known as a correlation ID. This is just a pattern. This is a correlation ID pattern. So you kind of inject a correlation ID, see where all it actually reached. So you can actually trace it. So the open tracing is another requirement. You might have heard of these words. Okay, you can actually see them in action if you're using some sort of a service mesh technology or open tracing based technology. You will be able to see them in action. And if you're a Java resource, probably if you're interested to know how this works, you may want to take a look at Spring Boot Sleuth. It is a nice framework. You'll be able to see this in action. All right. So overall, these are the core principles: modularity, autonomous, hide implementation details. Automation is important and critical, as I said. Stateless, that's one of the best principles which is out there. You need to be ensure that your things are stateless and it's highly observable overall, right? Now, what are the advantages which you get based on these particular principles? First thing is polyglot architecture. What it really means is I really don't need to worry about which technology I'm using for the given job. A good example of this is probably you built a search API and your search API was running very slow. And traditionally, if you have built your application on Java stack, it is not possible to kind of suddenly say, hey, I could do search better in Python. Is it possible for me to change this functionality to Python? It is not at all possible because your team is completely Java team, or it is your management has been already told that this whole application is going to be Java and built in Java, and it will be managed by your Java teams, right? And suddenly, just because one functionality can be done better in a specific technology, it is not possible for you to add this particular technology over the night. That's exactly what microservice changes. Microservice really helps you to kind of pick and select the right technology for the given job. Okay, that's the primary advantage of using polyglot architecture within microservices. It actually reduces your security depth depending on which technology is suitable and right for that particular task. You will be able to pick that particular technology. That's the benefit of using microservices. The other benefit is also known as honeycomb analogy. Okay, so what's honeycomb analogy? If you really see, a honeycomb doesn't grow so big in one single day. It actually grows organically. You would see that the honeybees are just add, cell by cell, cell by cell, and that's exactly the honeycomb grows. That's exactly the way it grows, right? Similarly, microservices also grow in the same way. It allows you to grow your microservices. It will be able to evolve over the period of time. You'll be able to replace them. You'll be able to add a new piece. You will be able to remove a new piece. You can experiment with that particular task if you really want. So all of this are possible with respect to microservices. Okay, so we will see some of them in action as such. Okay, so evolutionary design, one of the things which we talk about is about selective scaling. So what is selective scaling? As I said, let's assume I'm doing a big billion sale as part of Flipkart. You might have heard of this. It's one of the Indian giant on e-commerce. So today, if I'm doing a big billion day, what it means is I may receive a lot of orders. Just because I'm receiving a lot of orders, probably I may have to scale up my, order services or also some of the other dependent services which are actually receiving these orders. And that's exactly what is selective scaling. You are scaling based on a functionality. That's exactly what is the importance of doing a selective scaling within microservices. And this is possible with microservice architecture because you are not really dependent on anything else. Okay, so overall, it also gives you a, for each microservice is pretty much a small unit of work. You can, manage them separately. You can test them separately, deploy them separately, scale them separately based on your needs. Each of your microservices, one of the core principles is to start sooner or start quicker and shut down gracefully. This is one of the core principles. You can, if you really want to know more about these principles, you may want to see something known as 12-factor apps. Okay, please note this is just a webinar. If you really want to get into the more details of microservices, you may want to kind of deep dive into some of the functional areas of this. Okay, and it should be easier for new developers to understand. And this is a very important point because whenever you onboard someone to your team, it usually takes a couple of months, weeks, or whatsoever for them to even get a start. But if you're, because considering your microservice is small scope, and you really know what is the functionality you're dealing with, it is much easier for the new developers to pick up these kind of or your application without really any hassles, unlike your traditional monoliths. Now, all that are the good parts. Let's see the negatives, right? You have a distributed system. First of all, distributed systems are very difficult to manage. And now you have highly distributed system because you broke one functionality into 100 functionalities at this particular point. And now you have such a large system to manage. So it is difficult to manage consistency, worried about transactions, you're worried about request traveling, you're worried about all calls going over a specific protocol. It may impact your, speeds and so on. It may require ecosystem. We'll talk about ecosystem just in a minute. You may have to decide what actions are synchronous, what actions are asynchronous, right? All of these doing integration tests across my microservices is not easier, right? So how do I handle these things? Let's actually talk one at a time, right? So technically speaking, if you really switch your HTTP to HTTP2 or HTTP3, which is upcoming for that matter, HTTP2 is already in live, HTTP3 is upcoming. If you switch to from HTTP to HTTP2, already you will see 1.3% or 1.3 times higher speed on your uh, protocol or definitions, or how you are actually transferring the data between the microservices. Regarding distributed systems, yes, definitely distributed systems are complex. In order to maintain consistency, there are different ways, there are different patterns, there are different options which are available out there in order to manage consistency transactions. There's something like Saka pattern. You may want to check that. In fact, what I would say is the best way to do transactions in microservices is just retry till you fail. That's the best way to do it. Okay, and we have really done this in production as I'm speaking. Okay, synchronous, asynchronous, not everything needs to be synchronous, and that's a basic flaw in the way we think. We think that on click of a button everything should magically work. That's not really true. It takes time, depending on the volume of data, depending on the network, depending on where you're clicking from, who you are, and what access you have, right? And it is actually better to kind of think everything is asynchronous, and if you design your applications asynchronously, they will scale much better. And that's one of the important principles, especially if you heard about terms like orchestration versus choreography, right? Choreography will become very critical for evolving applications or evolutionary design, as we call it. What is choreography? Based on an event, you do certain actions. That's your choreography. So it is also known as event-driven architecture. So those are the ones which would be more helpful. So I see that there are a lot of questions. I will be responding to your questions at the later half of the session. Once we kind of go through the demo, we will still have some time for the question and answers. Okay. All right. Conclusion. Yes, definitely microservice architecture is more complex than a monolith, but it gives, or it kind of comes at the benefit of growing, organically and scaling easily. These are the things which you really need if your application is large, right? It may not be a need when your application is small. So what does it mean? If your application is too small and you know that you are never going to have more than 100 customers, maybe you don't need microservices. There's nothing wrong with monoliths. There are certain benefits, but just that you have to always procure and keep your infrastructure up and running for these 100 users who may ever come, right? So depending on the type of users you're dealing with, depending on the type of applications, you may have to kind of take this call whether microservices are right for you. All right, I said that microservices have an ecosystem, and this is exactly why we are actually going to talk about Kubernetes in particular, because Kubernetes provides you this ecosystem out of the box. Okay, that is an important aspect. Kubernetes will immediately provide you most of the things which you need as part of microservices out of the box, and we will see that. Okay, so we will need load balancer. Why we need load balancer? Because we are no longer going to have one service. We are going to have n services of the same type, right? And if I have n services of the same type, someone should be taking care of routing my data to the appropriate services of the same type. And that is not easy. Unless someone can figure out what are the related services, he will not be able to route to the right services. And that's exactly what, you get with respect to using technologies like Kubernetes, or you can also use traditional technologies like how Spring Boot does it. There's something like Spring Boot Zool, or there's Spring API Gateway, or Cloud Gateway as we call it. That is also capable of doing this. There are different options in this particular space. You might have also heard of API Gateway. We'll get into API Gateway later, but think of this as a load balancer, which is going to load balance across your microservices. That's exactly what you're seeing in this particular picture, and I'll show you this in action. All right. There's also something known as client-side load balancing. This is not a most efficient way of doing it. Here the client is already aware of the number of services which are out there, or the number of copies of my service which is out there, and it exactly automatically load balance. It says, okay, first time go to this service, second time go to this service, and so on. So this may not be a very useful principle unless you're actually targeting the services which are closer to you, right? And if you're targeting services which are closer to you, it is better to allow those services to be managed by, it is better for those services to be managed by the client themselves instead of you getting interfering into this particular scenario, right? Second important aspect is service discovery. What is service discovery? Each service, when it boots up, should register itself with the discovery server. And this discovery server is not something which is magical. Traditionally, what we used to do is we used to use servers like Eureka, or there is something known as HashiCorp's console. So these are the server names which you might have heard of in this particular space, where each microservice, as soon as it boots, it actually registers itself against these services. Once it is registered, whenever someone wants to talk to that service, let's say, hey, I want to talk to the product service in this case, right? It'll actually tell me, okay, here is your product service, please go talk to him, right? So that exactly what is the purpose of a discovery service. So the discovery service will help you discover where your services are running, okay? And this, in the traditional ways, was done by something like a Eureka or HashiCorp console. Those are the two popular ones. There are also other options like Zookeeper and so on if you really want to explore, right? In the modern era, or in the Kubernetes era for that matter, the service discovery is actually based on DNS. It's actually domain name based service discovery. And it's a very interesting way. If you really want to observe more about it, you may want to kind of explore a little bit on how Kubernetes actually handles the service discovery. Today we will actually see a little bit about it, but not great in detail. But it really does it based on domain name server, and every service will have its own domain name as soon as it registers, and we will see that. Okay. So if you have multiple copies, it will tell you here is one of the instances of this copy, please go talk to him, or it will actually route you to the appropriate same service which you're really looking for. That's exactly what is your service discovery load balancing. It can actually know how many instances are there. It knows how to route your traffic exactly. We will see this in action, where I will actually scale up a couple of services. You would notice that it will exactly route to those services, and will scale down a couple of services, and you will notice that it will actually stop sending traffic to it, right? Last but not the least, there is a pattern called the API gateway pattern, which will actually give you a single control of these different services. Because maybe if someone says /order on my website, then it comes to order service. Maybe someone says /products, it should go to product service, and so on. /customer should come to customer service. That's the kind of pattern what we really look at. Okay. So in order to understand all this in better fashion, let's actually take a look at some of these patterns in reality, right? It will be helpful for you to kind of know how they are actually being done or how they are being used. All right. So let me summarize this, and then we'll actually talk about Dockers and Kubernetes. That's the important area which you want to see in practice, right? So these are the principles: modularity, autonomous, hide implementation details, automation, stateless, highly observable. Advantages: polyglot design, honeycomb analogy, evolutionary design, big versus small. It's all much better now with respect to selectively scaling what I really want. Drawbacks: highly distributed systems, difficult to manage. It needs an ecosystem. Traditionally, I don't need an ecosystem. I never wanted a load balancer, or I never needed a discovery server. But with microservices, they are must have. You don't really have an option, because you don't know how many copies of the same service is even running at this given point of time. And then as I said, it needs an ecosystem. So the ecosystem consists of at least bare minimum is a load balancer and a service discovery. These are the two important ones. API gateway, or we can also call it as an ingress controller if you're really talking in terms of Kubernetes, could actually act. Or there are also other API gateways which could manage and route your traffic effectively. All right. So let's get into Dockers. Before I get into Dockers, let's actually see what are containers. Okay, so in order to simplify this, I just want to play a small video. You may want to kind of just listen to it. So it explains what are containers and what are Kubernetes in a very quick demo, and we can actually talk more about it after we kind of see it.
Digital transformation is driving the adoption of a new application development and deployment approach called cloud native. Container technology is the key enabler of this modern IT approach. But what is a container? Why is it so powerful? To use an analogy, let's take a look at a shipping container before we answer this question. The modern shipping industry standardized a set of container sizes, so no matter what's being shipped, the containers remain a constant size.
So if you see this, modern containers are actually derived from the way how shipping industry has actually, refined themselves. So in shipping, whenever you transfer your content from one location to another country or another location or whatsoever for that matter, it was a common problem that people used to mix up the content or you used to end up losing some of your deliverables. So what shipping industry did was they came up with a concept of containers and they isolated what is being delivered and they allowed people to buy the specific space or specific, space within a given container. And the containers came in a standard size like 10 feet, 20 feet, and 40 feet, and you are free to pick your container size, and that's exactly what you get. And that's exactly whatever you push into it would be delivered for you. All right.
So they'll fit on every container ship or truck. This practice significantly improved the operational efficiency of the shipping industry. The promise behind software containers is essentially the same. Containers are a solution to the problem of how to get software to run reliably when moved from one computing environment to another.
So if you see what is the most important challenge or one of the biggest challenge in software industry is when you hear a statement saying it works on my machine or it works in my desktop or it works in my environment, right? That's the most common or the most biggest challenge in software industry. Yeah, it works on your machine because you definitely did something out there which helped you make your software work perfectly on your machine, but it is not going to run anywhere else, or it is not going to perform the same task in the same way in the other machines or in the different environments. And that's exactly what containers are here to solve. Containers actually solve the problem of portability across the different systems. If you observe this particular video, you notice that from desktops to mobiles to cloud computing to laptop, all of it it's running the same container, provided you have the same container runtime engine or have a container runtime engine which can understand this container. It should be able to execute all the dependencies on it. So let's see what is there within a container. Yeah.
A container image consists of an entire runtime environment. An application, plus everything needed to run it: code, runtime, system tools, system libraries, settings, all bundled into one lightweight standalone executable package. And multiple containers can be deployed on a single OS and share the same OS kernel. By containerizing the application and its dependencies, differences in OS and underlying infrastructure are abstracted away.
So that's the most important aspect. So if you see it, see here, right? If you might have heard of containers like Docker containers, right? So if you see, you think of this particular container runtime engine as a Docker container. As you can see, just in a minute, you will actually see a demo of a Docker image and how I run a Docker image. So I'm running on Mac, so you can think of my operating system as Mac, and it has some sort of hypervisor. End of the day, it is abstracting away the hard operating system, hypervisor, and any other physical requirements. All I know is that there is a container runtime and it can actually run multiple containers. Now, what's a container runtime? If you're from Java, I would just say, think of it like a Java runtime running Java applications. It's really that, because Java applications literally used to run like containers. Just that the Java applications used to run just Java. That was the problem. Whereas the software containers, as we call it, or Linux containers at this particular point, they are capable of running any of the applications, irrespective of whether they are belonging to Java or any other technology. Okay. So the promise, what these container runtime engines do is, if you build a container, I will manage the container for you and I will run it for you. That's exactly what is the promise you have.
Now, you can move your application easily from a developer's laptop to a testing environment, from a staging environment into a production environment, or from a physical machine to a VM in a private or public cloud, and always know that your application will work just right. Besides being readily portable, containers are also very lightweight and super fast. A container may only be tens of megabytes in size, and containerized applications can be started almost instantly. Due to these characteristics, containers serve as the basis of enabling the decomposed microservices-based architecture of cloud-native applications.
So that's the relationship between microservices and containers. Okay, many people wonder how come these technologies are related. The reality is because of the way containers provide you the isolation and the speed at which it kind of boots and the kind of ability for it to be tear down quickly, to boot them up, scale them up quickly. That really is what you really need as part of microservices. If I'm able to do that in any technology, that technology can be used for microservices. That's exactly why containers and microservices came together in building cloud native applications, as we call them now, right? So what is the bigger problem? The bigger problem is when you have too many containers or when you have too many applications. That's exactly when things become complex, right? let's see how that could be handled.
As more containers are used, enterprises need orchestration tools to help them run these containers. Kubernetes is an open source system for automating deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. It groups containers that make up an application into logical units called pods, nodes, and namespaces for easy management and discovery. Kubernetes builds upon over a decade of experience running production workloads at Google and has a large and active community contributing to it. It brings scalability, flexibility, and portability to applications and has become the leading orchestrator for running containers and building modern apps.
That's about it. So that's about the Kubernetes and Docker in general. So we will actually see them in action. So overall, what is a Docker or any other container runtime engine? How do they work? Let's actually take an example of Docker. It is much easier, much simpler to understand. So if you see a Docker architecture is something like this. So Docker runs on your machine or runs on a host machine. It actually starts up a daemon server, or it actually starts to listen for requests coming in as a daemon thread, and it kind of waits for someone to issue the commands, and these commands are issued with some sort of a CLI, usually a command line CLI or a web CLI. These are the ones which will actually issue the commands, and when you kind of get these commands, based on what you ask, for example, let's say I want to run Nginx image, right? If I want to run an Nginx image, someone has to kind of give me an Nginx application. If I want to run a Tomcat image, I need to get the Tomcat image from somewhere. So what's an image? So what you really need to understand are the terminologies like images and containers. So image, you can think of it like ISO file. So what's an ISO file? We know that the operating system, when we used to get like Microsoft or Ubuntu or whichever operating system, we used to get them like ISO files. And once you download the ISO file, you burn it onto some sort of a CD or some sort of a writable space, and that's the one which gets ready for you to install on your real laptop. Once you install that particular ISO or the disk, whatever you installed, right? That's when you are able to get a running version of that particular operating system. You think of that running version of this operating system as a container. That's the easiest way to understand. So once you have a running instance of your software, now you're free to change or modify what you want to change and modify. That's exactly what you need to see when you talk in terms of containers. So as containers grow, it was required for us to have an ecosystem for people to share these containers or share these images between themselves. For that, what Docker did was Docker actually came up with something known as hub.docker.com, and it's like a repository of containers, repository of images where people actually can publish their own images. Even I have my own images on my hub.docker.com. So people who want to retrieve our own services, they will be able to retrieve from the registry, and they will be able to deploy it into their environments. And this need not be public registry, it could also be a private registry, because when I'm in my own enterprise, I really don't want to publish my images to the outside world, right? So it is possible for you to have your own private registry. So we'll talk about this in detail in the next, along with the a small demo. Then we'll actually get into Kubernetes. So let me actually go to my machine. So here's my console. I hope all of you are able to see my console. Let me just clear it. All right, so I already have my Docker running. So if I say Docker version, you will actually see that I'm running on the latest version, which is 19.03.8. This is the latest version of Docker out there, and I already have a couple of images. So I said that there's a command called images. You see this? I have a lot of images. All this K8s, whatever you're seeing, these are all related to Kubernetes. Do not worry about them. And you notice that there are also other images which are out here. So let me actually delete this image and we'll talk more about it. Okay, so I'll just say Docker. So there are a couple of, just say Docker. You'll actually get a lot of, details about what you can do with the particular Docker command. See, you can actually manage containers, you can manage network, you can manage your own images. So these are the three important commands which you may generally use whenever you're learning Docker in general. Okay, so Docker is not really very difficult. It's much simpler to use. So let me just do clear, and then let's actually download a container and let's understand what is it. Okay, so let me do Docker RMI or okay, so I've deleted that image. Let me talk a little bit about it. So Docker containers are actually nothing but a set of layered images. Okay, so you think of it like this. So if someone created a Docker image, what they've really done is they've actually put together a set of layers which will make a container. So you kind of say that, okay, my base image is a kernel. On top of it, I want to run a Debian operating system or a Ubuntu operating system, or I don't really want to run anything. I just want to add a couple of programs. Each of the things which you add as part of a program into your Docker will become an image. Okay, so let's actually understand that. To see this in action, I will just go to, so if you see this, I don't really have the Nginx image anymore. If I do images, grep Nginx, I don't have anything at this point. So let me just do Docker run Nginx. Okay, just sorry. Let me type it quickly. Docker run Nginx. Docker run -p. I'll just run it on port 5000 just for the sake of showing you. I will just run it in -d mode, and I'll just say my Nginx or Nginx. Okay. So if I run this particular command, what it really does is it actually downloads the image because it will not find this image locally. So let me show you. As you can see, it says unable to find this image locally. And you notice that it is actually pulling from somewhere, right? And you notice that it is actually, downloading it layer by layer. This is exactly how those 3 layers what you just saw. Okay, these are the exact 3 layers what you just saw as part of your image. Okay, and you notice that it actually completed and it is already running. How do I know it is running? If I do docker ps, you notice that it just booted 7 seconds ago. That means this is a command which I just issued. Okay, how do I prove that it is working? I just run it on port 5000. I'll just say call localhost colon 5000, and I should see an Nginx page right here. Look at that. So I was able to boot Nginx on my system with almost 0 effort, right? So think of your microservice being done in this particular fashion, and it is not just these kind of ready-made or open source softwares. You can even pull your own application. So let me just run one more thing, and I will just stop the Docker part here. You will be able to, compose any services as microservices. That's exactly what I'm going to showcase. So I'll just say port number 8080. I'll also put 8080. I'll run a Java service so that you can be sure that it is actually running it. Instead of doing -d, let me do -d. No, it's okay. Let it be there. Okay, we'll just do my service. So I have a username called Shiva SPK. There's a interesting REST boot, Spring Boot service which is out here. Let me run it like this, and you will notice that it is not there locally. So it is again searching somewhere, and we will see where it is going to be. Okay, and you notice that it is actually pulling a couple of layers, and you notice that my image is much heavier and larger than the previous one which was downloaded for Nginx. And you notice that it is actually taking a little more time for downloading. But once it boots, right, you notice that it's actually a Spring Boot application, right? And it is actually a completely self-contained microservice. It has database and everything else as well, and it is actually starting. And let me just show you once it starts. See this? It took around 12 seconds to start. It's not a really good, because it's just for development's sake. I'll just open a new tab, and I'll say curl http://localhost 8080, and you notice that it will actually respond with the REST API. Look at that. It is a REST API of to-dos, which is actually up and running, and it is actually level 3 REST API. If you guys are aware of REST, you would understand what I mean. It's Helios enabled REST API. It works beautifully well. Okay, so that's a little bit about microservices. So what we are talking about is you will be able to create a microservice based on your functional use case, and you'll be able to deploy them as a container. In order to create a container, all you really need to do is you need to create something as a Docker file, which is just a set of instructions. Especially for technologies like Java, it is just 4 lines, okay, 4 or 5 lines, and you'll be done with your Docker file. There are also other platforms which will enable you to build your own, containers with ease. And there are frameworks like Jib and others which you can actually use. All right. So that's a little bit about containers. Now, why containers are not super critical? Because there are many technologies which enable containers, but you will end up using probably one of the other orchestration systems like Kubernetes to use containers. Because when you have too many of these microservices, they're not easy to manage. And that's exactly why it is important for you to understand Kubernetes. And today we'll actually talk more about Kubernetes. All right. So what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes architecture looks something like this. So when you have one machine, one container runtime, you need not worry about a technology like this. But when you have multiple machines, a lot of compute power and a lot of technology, a lot of microservices out there which are there to be combined together, to be managed. I want to say I want 3 copies of my to-do REST service to be up and running all the time. How do I ensure that? How do I ensure that I am able to scroll, grow gradually, like from 2 services to 20 services if the traffic increases? How do I do that, right? How do I ensure that if I search for this particular service, I'm actually reaching that service? How do I ensure that I get load balancing done? All of these are answered by Kubernetes. So in order to see this quickly, okay, instead of just showing you an high-level architecture, a Kubernetes is actually an cluster-based architecture. As you can see, it forms cluster based on master and couple of nodes. You can actually have any number of nodes. The maximum number which I've seen till date is 2,500 plus. In fact, at this point, I think it is possible to have 5,000 nodes as well as part of your Kubernetes clusters. So it is possible for you to have a gigantic cluster, and many companies are already using things at this particular scale. Okay, so for the quick demo, what I want to show you is I already have a Kubernetes installed. I'll just take kubectl version. So you notice that I actually have a Kubernetes running on Docker Desktop, which is running a slightly older version of 15.5, whereas the other one which I have is 18. Okay, so this is the client version, this is the server version. For a quick demo, what I really want to do is I just want to show you that there is nothing at this point in my Kubernetes. So in Kubernetes, everything is in terms of pods and deployments. Okay, so you will notice that there's nothing as of now. Everything is empty. Okay, and if I do get SVC, which is services, all of these concepts you need to understand. This is an inbuilt, Kubernetes service, so I don't worry about this. As of now, there is nothing. There is a plain Kubernetes cluster with me. So let's actually talk about microservices with Kubernetes. Okay, so I'll just quickly run a demo. I will run an Nginx demo so that it is easier for you to understand the things. Okay, so just give me 1 second. All right, let's go ahead and get it from here. So that's my notes. That's my notes. Okay, so these are the commands which we're going to run. So we'll actually go ahead and run it one by one. So just let me get that from here as well. Okay, so let me just reduce the size of it and go to the next tab. All right, so these are the commands which we're going to just quickly see. I will not spend too much time explaining these commands, but you'll actually see some of the basic functionalities which you want to see. So if I want to deploy a particular container into Kubernetes, I can actually do it in 2 ways. Okay, one is declarative way, one is imperative way. What you're seeing here is called imperative way. Okay, so I'll quickly show you some of the basic behaviors. So in order to show that it is possible to pull a container from anywhere, here you're noticing that I'm actually pulling a container from something known as Google Samples Hello application. Okay, it's a simple Hello application. You notice that as soon as I run this, it actually created an application. And if I do something called as get deploy, which we just had nothing, you notice that it immediately came up. Okay, and this service as of now would start responding, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so let me just go ahead and expose this service and then we'll talk about it. All right, so I will expose it on my service, and I will just do get SVC, and I'll tell you how to access it. All right, so you notice that it actually created this because last time only one was there, and here 6 seconds ago it actually created a new service. And you notice this, there is a port number called 3054. So to simplify the definition, what I'll do is I'll just clear this. I'll say curl localhost colon this particular port, and you notice that it is actually saying hello world. And observe that every time it is actually going to 1 copy of my service. It's absolutely going to 1 copy of my service. Right now, what I will do is I will actually scale it up to a couple of copies. Okay, let's actually make it 5 instead of 3. Okay, so I'll just make it 5. You notice that it says it's scaled. How do I know that it's scaled? Right, so I will just do get deploy. You notice that there are 5 copies running. How do I know that? If I do get pods, you will notice that some of those services immediately started just 11 seconds ago, whereas the first service is around 72 seconds ago. So you have services which are scaled. Now, I told you that you will actually have a load balancing out of the box in Kubernetes. To prove that, you see this, first time I went to something else, second time I went to something else, third time I went to something else, fourth time I went to something else, and fifth time I'm going to something else altogether. Look at the last digits. The host name is constantly changing, and this host name is something not magical. It's actually coming from the same call which I just did. You see this? These are the same 5 instances, right? And as I said, this is one of the important features of Kubernetes, as you're able to see the load balancing of your application just here with respect to services. It's not only about scaling up, it should also manage scale down. So what I will do is I will actually scale it down to just 2 containers, just to show you. Okay, I quickly scaled up. Let me see how can I quickly scale down. You see this? Immediately they're terminating within no minute. Okay, within a short span, you will actually notice that all of them get cleared and only 2 will be running. And while these 2 are running, it's not that, you will also notice that the previous load balanced elements will still run only between these 2. So the application is still load balanced. It is actually just load balanced between these 2 instances, what you're actually seeing here, right? So you have a native load balancing within Kubernetes with the concept of something known as service. Okay, here what you're seeing is node port, but it is all services overall. Okay, so that's a simple example of how you are able to scale up applications and scale down applications with the help of Kubernetes. Just to show you, it is not required for you to do it manually. I just want to show you based on load. Okay, so this is an example which I would run in order to see how I will be able to scale up an application, okay, based on certain load. Okay, in order to do that, you actually need to, all of these, you can actually pick it from the kubernetes.io. There is a detailed examples of most of this. It is possible for you to there is something known as horizontal pod autoscaler. Okay, so if you have something as horizontal pod autoscaler, this will automatically manage based on load. For example, if the CPU utilization has crossed certain number, or if the memory has crossed certain number, that's exactly I want to increase the number of number of things which I'm doing. You may have something like that, right? So depending on those, right, I will just quickly run a couple of commands to show you a demo of it so that you can actually see. Okay, so let me just do history and grep it. It is easier for me to get it like that. Okay, so that you can actually see. All right, so let's see a demo of how it can be done automatically. All right. Okay. All right, let me just show you on a simple example. Probably I will just do it on this particular PHP Apache one. Okay, unfortunately, I don't really have it in my local, I believe. Proper. Let me just get it from the image. So here is the example. So here is exactly where you will be able to get your image. So just let me do that. And let me just switch back to my terminal. Okay, so we'll just do kubectl apply of this particular application. So this is an application which you are actually going to see. It will actually download immediately. And if I now do get deploy, you see this, I will actually just do get deploys. And you have 2 applications at this point within Kubernetes, one called PHP Apache, the other one called Hello. Hello is something which we just did a while ago. Okay, so the new application which I have is a PHP one. So what I really want to do is I want to scale up between 1 to 10 containers, okay, or 1 to 10 services when there is a load, and we will actually generate the load so that it can actually scale up. We will see that in action. Okay, so you notice this, I'm saying when the CPU usage reaches 50%, I really want you to increase all the way till, maybe let me just make it 12 so that you can actually see it. 10 is okay, 10 you will never reach actually. So you will notice that as soon as the CPU utilization is greater than 50%, I want it to scale. So to do that, I just gave this particular command. It will automatically do a auto scaling. And to see that in action, we need to generate some load. Okay, before we generate the load, let's see what is the CPU utilization. Okay, just give it some time. It will actually come down to 0. You will actually see this unknown will become 0 just in some time. As of now, there is not even a single one running. It is still creating. Okay, so just wait for it. As you can see, it was 0 0. It became 1 at this point. That means there's one service which is up and running. Within short span, you will actually notice that it will actually give out metrics saying, okay, I know that it is 0%. See this. So there is no load. Hence, there is nothing which is happening. All right. So let me just put it in watch so that it is easier for us to understand this. I will run this command in a watch so that you can actually see that. Okay, I don't have a watch in this one. It's, by the way, watch is a Ubuntu command, or it is there in Linux. It's not there in Mac. Okay, so you notice that it is going to constantly watch. Let me just cancel this, clear. I'll just run this again. Okay, so that's watching. While this is watching, let's actually start pushing load into this particular service, and let's see if it really does auto scaling. Okay, to do that, I just have a small container which will generate load. So I will just do it in the other tab. Okay, I'll just do a Control C here, let it clear. Okay, So that's my load generator. It is actually going to generate the load. Okay. So just wait for a minute and you will actually notice that it will start printing okay, okay, okay. That means for every okay, it is actually making a HTTP call, and that's when it is printing. All right. So here you go. It is actually printing okay, okay, okay. That means it's actually making call. While it is making call, let's see how is our system behaving. So just observe this part of the numbers. You will understand what is happening here. Okay. All right, as the load increases, you would realize that it suddenly jumps. You can actually see that number of replicas will go higher. It'll actually add like a next line, so you can actually wait for that behavior to occur. Okay, so there's a load which is going up. You will suddenly see it will come like 249% and so on. So let's actually see how is the load. Okay, and then we will see the reaction from Kubernetes. It takes a minute for the load to build up. Just give it a minute, please, and you should be able to see that in action. So this is called horizontal pod autoscaler, where let's assume some random traffic came. You see that 248%, right? So there is a huge load, and you will suddenly notice that if you have to share 248%, that means I need to span up new replicas, and you will notice that it at least span up 4 or 5 replicas depending on the load. Okay, to kind of mitigate. There you go. You see this? Suddenly there are 4 replicas out there. So from 1 replica, it increased to 4 replica just to handle the load. And as soon as you notice the load continues, you will actually see that this will reduce. Okay, just wait for it. It will actually balance. Okay, see this, the fifth one which actually had to come, and you will notice that everything will have somewhere around 40% or 35%. All right, so if you observe that, within some time you will actually notice that it will scale up. All right, so that's your automated scaling of your application based on the incoming load. And there's a beautiful feature. See this, 62%. So probably there needs to be still one more. Okay, just to ensure that it is balancing the load within 50%. Okay, so that's the kind of spec. You have just said that, whenever I see that the CPU utilization is going above 50%, probably I want you to, scale up my number of instances which are actually handling my load. That's exactly what it is doing. Okay, so as you can see, 62% is definitely higher. So within some time, it will actually span one more probably. Okay, and if we stop the load within 5 minutes, all of these things will vanish and come back to 1. Okay, so that's something which you can see as well. Okay, so let's just see if it is happening. Otherwise, I will just stop it. It will actually come back to 1, but it will take some time, because it is not a good practice to shut down your servers as soon as the load reduces. That's not really a good practice. It may be a sudden knee-jerk reaction, so you may want to wait, watch, and then start reducing the number of services. That's exactly what you would see. Okay, so it actually waits for 5 minutes. See this, totally have 5 copies. All of them are able to handle the traffic. So it is less than 50%, so it will continue to be here. So let it continue to be here. So what I will do here is I will stop the traffic. Okay, so I just stop the traffic. So within the next 5 minutes, you will actually notice that it will come back to 1. So I will ignore this here. So that's all I really had to show in the following demo. All right, guys, I think that's pretty much it from my side. If you have any questions, let me know. And also, feel free to talk to our folks at Cognitia. It was, nice talking to all of you. Have a nice day.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you so much. I believe
Thanks.
it was a great session, and I see there were a couple of questions still popping up, but I think it's time to wind up the session. So, in case you still have curiosity to know more about Docker and Kubernetes, we are conducting a masterclass with Shiva only, yes, tomorrow. So you can actually enroll yourself into the session. So I'll
All right.
actually do. I'll leave a quick link here into the chat box so that you can go to this link directly, look out for the content yourself, and register if you want to. Alternately, you can write to webinar@cognitia.com and we will be able to help you with whatever details you want. I'm dropping all the details in the chat box here for everybody. Let me quickly make this. Okay, here's the link to the sessions direct web page. Also, I'm dropping in 2 email addresses, and we will be able to help you in case you have more questions. One is webinar@cognitia.com, and second will be my email address, and I'll be able to help you direct to the right person to enroll. Please feel free to write to either of the email addresses, and definitely please visit the web link that has been provided, and let us know if you need to know more about it. Thank you so much, everybody. You'll receive a survey form post this session ends. We will look forward to your valuable feedbacks, and we'll catch up again with some new set of sessions. Till then, take care. Please be safe and stay indoors. Thank you.